Welcome to this report on a trip that I've recently taken, a solidarity trip to the West Bank. I'm really so deeply grateful to all of you for being here tonight. And we've got a great crowd online as well, and tonight's going to be recorded. My hope is that this will be just the beginning of this sort of kind of download of all of this experience. It's going to be very difficult for me to boil down the experience that I had in the West Bank into just a brief presentation and discussion tonight. And there's just so much that we're not going to be able to cover. There are going to be so many questions that will come up. And my hope is that this will be the beginning of an ongoing dialogue, an ongoing conversation. And this is kind of like a trial run for this presentation of mine. And of course, my very detailed notes would not print. So I will be relying on pictures, and I'll be relying on memory, and I'll be relying on my phone I've took some notes on, and it'll be this thank you for being the test run this evening, and thank you in advance for your grace. Welcome to this Solidarity Report. As we get started, I wanted to invite us all in to share this community space with some agreements that we can make to one another. I recognize that this is going to be a conversation that will perhaps bring up some different feelings, different thoughts, different opinions, right? And I want us to be able to fully arrive into this space together and think about what it will take for us to be together in this space, reflecting on this conversation, something that is, those of us that have been following the news, those of us who have been watching the videos, that have been seeing the horrors over the past 5 months, it's going to bring up a lot. And we want to welcome you into this conversation, allow ourselves to come together and to have the conversation fully. But also I want to name that I'll be saying some things that perhaps will cause some folks to feel unsettled. I just want to acknowledge that I'm coming into this and I'm going to be using words that might be disturbing, like genocide, like ethnic cleansing, like apartheid. And that's going to be difficult, but I feel for me, it's important that I do so in order to be faithful, to be a faithful witness of what I've seen and what I have heard. I don't feel that I would be able to honestly say that I have borne witness and that I have shared the message that I have seen and heard without using those words. And so I acknowledge that there will be folks in this room with different opinions. And so how can we be in this room together, and how can we enter into dialogue together knowing that those differences will be present, right? So the way tonight's going to work is I'm going to give a presentation to the extent that I'm able to over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have dialogue, we'll have questions. There'll be an opportunity for you to bring your perspective. There'll be an opportunity for you to voice your concerns about things that I've shared and curiosities about things that I've said. And so in that moment of dialogue, I invite all of us to share time and space equitably. I also invite us to lean into discomfort and uncertainty, knowing that discomfort and uncertainty are the ways that we grow, right? And I also want us to be able to hold space for the reality that a lack of safety is not the same thing as discomfort. And so everybody in this room tonight is safe. You are loved. No matter what you are bringing into this conversation, no matter what your opinions and your feelings, and whatever our differences, you are loved, you are welcome, you are safe. And we are here together in community, and we can lean into those differences while also embracing the discomfort. The discomfort's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. It's something that is showing us something. It's an opportunity to learn and to grow. And so let's lean into the discomfort tonight. Also, when we have those disagreements, we agree to give one another grace, knowing that the work of living our values is hard, and we will all mess up at some point. And so maybe we'll say things in a way that we would have wished we'd said it in a different way, and recognize that perhaps we didn't live into those values in this moment or that moment. And so we'll give each other grace while also recognizing impact. And so understanding intent and impact are different things, and yet we will give each other grace, give each other room to grow. We will seek first to understand and assume good intent, also acknowledging impact. If something we say or do causes harm, we commit to working through it and doing better. And specifically for this evening, even though I'm going to be using words to describe the situation as I see it, because I see it as part of my prophetic role as a minister, to name things as I see them, specifically institutional and structural harm, and so that I can apply the theological and spiritual truths that I hold dear to the crises of our time. I also want to recognize that the core theological and spiritual value of this community that we're sitting in right now is the affirmation of each person's dignity. And so we are agreeing together, even if I'm using words that might be unsettling, yet and still, every single one of us in this place agrees that we deeply honor the dignity and the worth of every human being, of Palestinians and Israelis, and we can hold space to grieve the loss of every single life that has been taken, while also having these other hard conversations about the structures and the ongoing violence, and actually address some root causes, right? So we deeply grieve together, we lament, and we say every single death is a travesty. And we commit to making our core value of affirming each person's dignity a guidepost for our discussion and for our actions. And so I ask you this evening, are these agreements that you can agree to in this evening's conversation? Is there anything that is missing in this community agreement that you feel needs to be named in order to feel like you can fully show up to this conversation tonight? My background, and here's a picture of me just after having done my first advocacy meeting on the Hill, and I was very excited, as you can see, that one of my new friends took a picture of me. I was like, okay, I've got to include that, because I like my smile in it, so thank you for humoring me. A little bit about me, for those of you, we've got a lot of different folks in here and some new folks, right? And so, and many of you might not also, even though we've known each other for almost 5 years now, believe it or not, there are certain things that maybe you don't know about me. So some background for me on this subject. My name is Sarah Klockowski. I am the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. My grandparents on my father's side were interned in a concentration camp in Germany. That's actually where they met. And shortly after they were released in 1945, they got married and my father was born in Germany, and then they moved to the United States. I grew up seeing the impact of the Holocaust on my family and on people that I knew. Understanding the Holocaust and developing relationships with people later on in high school that were survivors of the Holocaust was a deeply formative part of my life. It's part of why I think I am moved so deeply by the ongoing horrors in the world today. And so that's part of the background, that's part of the formative structure for me in looking at this conversation. I was raised in a context, in light of that, that looked at the formation of the state of Israel as the answer to the horrors of the Holocaust and of European anti-Semitism, that was the thing that needed to happen in order to make restitution. It was, in my formation, a good thing in order to answer for those horrors. Not only that, I was raised in an evangelical tradition. And for those of you who don't know, evangelicalism is, in many spheres of evangelicalism, very deeply entrenched in Christian Zionism. This idea that it is God's will that the Jewish people are God's chosen people, and that it is God's will, in order to usher in the end times, that the state of Israel be instituted and that Jewish people from all over the world return to Israel. That was a theological core value that I was raised with growing up. So not only did I have that emotional connection to Israel as being the answer to my parents were my grandparents weren't Jewish. They were Polish, Ukrainian, Catholic, but they were there were 5 million others that were killed in the concentration camps, and they and their family members were those that were in the concentration camps that were survivors of them. And so not only did I have some sort of emotional connection to that, and the establishment of Israel as an answer to that, but I also had a theological connection to the state of Israel. This was God's will, right? So any questioning of the state is a questioning of what God had ordained. I tell you all this so you understand that I am intimately familiar with many, I'm sure not all, but many arguments in favor of the establishment of Israel, its morality, and its ongoing position as a just and right place for us, something for us as Americans to support. I have that background and I have that sympathy. And yet, and still, part of my theological deconstruction was deconstructing Zionism. That was part of the evolution of my faith. As I left evangelicalism, I had to ask a lot of questions about the things that I was taught. And something that I really had to do a lot of work interrogating was Zionism, and especially I remember the images of the peaceful March of Return in 2018 that occurred right as I was trying to reconstruct my understanding of my spiritual identity, my theological identity, and my core values as someone that was now being shaped by the Black Lives Matter movement, someone that was being shaped by other movements for justice and theologies of liberation that you've all, if you've been around here at First Parish, have heard me preach about, that I am not free until everybody is free, and that God is on the side of the oppressed. Those were core values of my new constructed theology. And so as I watched the March of Return happen and I watched Israeli snipers mow down these peaceful protesters, I had in my mind the image of Selma, the image of peaceful civil disobedience, people marching for their rights and being mowed down and being oppressed. And I had to ask myself, what is this? You know, this is, once again, something that I had not understood to be, I didn't have that perspective, and I had to do a lot of investigation. So that's been part of my ongoing reconstruction work since then. And so I came to First Parish already having these core values. I share this so that you understand, and maybe you've heard me from time to time in my sermons say, we are not free until Palestine is free. I've used that as a refrain from time to time in my sermons. This is a core value. This is part of my theology. And so when the opportunity came in the wake of the most recent devastation in Gaza to go and be an eyewitness, to go be in solidarity with the Palestinian people in this moment, I was so deeply honored, and I will say this is something that is, for me, going to be a life-defining event. This is going to be something that I remember for the rest of my life, and I also see as part of my calling for the rest of my life, to be a witness of what I've seen and what I've heard. And I thank you for listening to me tonight as I take this first public step. I've done a lot of solo work of interrogating. This is my first attempt at a public step to bear witness and to share what I believe and what I've seen. So again, thank you for being here. Here's our group, plus Issa Amro. Issa Amro there in the center-ish up here. So he was not on our trip. I'll more on him later. A human rights defender in Hebron. This is one of the group photos that was taken in Hebron. There were 23 of us from all across the country, 12 different Christian denominations represented, clergy, lay leaders, people of all different life experiences and ages, and I think I was the youngest, if not one of the youngest on the group. And most of the people there had been many times over. Most of the people have been working on the issue of Palestinian liberation for years. Many have lived there. And so this was our group. And the reason that we went, we were invited. We were urgently requested to come to Palestine, specifically to the West Bank. What we've been seeing on our screens over the last 5 months has been in Gaza Strip in Palestine. And so we did not go there, but we were invited by Palestinian church leaders, community leaders, just a whole range of organizations that came together to say, eyes are on Gaza, rightfully so. There is a horrific genocide that is happening there. And there is a slow-moving genocide that is happening here. And it has gotten worse since October. And we need you to come and see. Please come and see what is happening and go tell what you have seen. And so the first leg of this delegation, this solidarity delegation, was to go and spend time in Palestine, in specifically the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. And then the next leg was to go and tell what we have seen. So we went to D.C. for 3 days for meetings with our representatives, for actions of civil disobedience and public witness, to tell what we have seen. And so that was the experience, and let's go ahead and dive in. A little bit of an intro. I want to just name who are we talking about and where are we talking about? So the Palestinians are the people who have lived, the indigenous peoples that have lived in the area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea for thousands of years. I have met Palestinians that can trace their lineage in their cities and towns back 700 years. They have lived there and they are indigenous to that land. In 1948, brief summary, what ended up happening was, as the establishment of Israel was taking place under the authority of the European nations that comprised the United Nations at that time, they divided up, they just started drawing lines, as Europeans are wont to do. And so they said, okay, here's 55% of the nation for the 35% that are Jewish refugees. Here's 45% of the land for the 65% of the population that are the indigenous Palestinians. Also, just a note, Palestinians that have lived there for centuries, on and on and on, they are Muslim, they are Jewish, they are Christian, they are of a whole range of identities, and multiplicity and diversity was baked into the culture and has been baked into the culture for thousands of years. That was one of the key points that several of the folks that we met with wanted to make, is that we lived in harmony in our diversity. We recognize the importance of multiplicity. We do not want to erase that diversity in our region. It's part of who we are as Palestinians. And I think it's important to name that because it helps us to remind ourselves that this is not a religious war. This is not it's not a sibling rivalry. This is not a conflict between two equal siblings. This is the result of an ethnic cleansing. Basically what happened in 1948, because the Palestinians did not like the plan that was given to them and said, no, this is our land, this is our town, this is our home, we don't want to leave. They were forcibly removed from their homes. 3/4 of the Palestinians that lived in what is today called Israel were forced out of their homes and villages at gunpoint. Over 500 villages, Palestinian villages, were destroyed in what is today called the Nakba. What ended up happening is that those 750,000 that were expelled ends up settling in what is now called the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, as well as surrounding areas and beyond. We've got hundreds of thousands. There are currently hundreds of thousands of refugees that are registered in the West Bank. Making up 30% of the population of the West Bank are refugees from the Nakba and their children and grandchildren. 78% of the population of the Gaza Strip, over 800,000 people in the Gaza Strip, are refugees, registered refugees of the 1948 Nakba, and they comprise 78% of the population. 78% of the population that's currently being carpet bombed and starved to death are refugees of the ethnic cleansing of 1948, and they're being forcibly removed from their homes again. We went to East Jerusalem, so just to name where Palestinians are now, there are still 1/4 of the Palestinians that were in the land in 1948 stayed. And so there are currently Palestinian Israeli citizens that do live in what they call 48, right? That was the terminology, the people that are their descendants and still living there. Then there are Palestinians living in East Jerusalem. So in 1948, I know I'm going to get to the trip very soon, I'm sorry. I just wanted to give some context of like where I went and why and like who were the people that I was interacting with, right? For those, if you know this 101, I apologize for the review. But the folks in East Jerusalem, so in 1948, there was a green line drawn down the middle of East and West Jerusalem. West Jerusalem was marked as the capital of Israel. East Jerusalem was marked as the capital of Palestine. In 1967, during the 1967 war, Israel illegally annexed East Jerusalem. It became, in their eyes, one city of Jerusalem. It is not internationally recognized as such. It was illegally annexed, and the Palestinians that lived there, Israel did not want them, right? So they wanted the land without the people. That has been the ongoing theme. And so they gave, instead of citizenship to these new citizens of this illegally annexed land, instead of giving citizenship, they gave permanent residency, quote unquote, permanent. More on that later. Then we had the West Bank, Gaza, and then of course refugees outside of historic Palestine. So let's dive into the trip. First, I want to talk about East Jerusalem, and then we'll talk about places that I went in the West Bank. Here we are, the rooftop of the first place I stayed, my first evening. You'll notice this is in East Jerusalem, so this is in the Palestinian area of the city. We've got water jugs on all of these roofs over here. The reason for those water jugs, you'll see them on the Palestinian roofs. You will not see them on Israeli roofs. Now, one thing to note before I get into more, again, context. In East Jerusalem, since 1967, in order to continue to get further and further hold on the land, Israeli settlements have been built within the city of East Jerusalem, right? So in East Jerusalem, even though it's historically been the Palestinian part of the city, there are Israeli settlements. So we drove through, I went to and around Israeli settlements, as well as Palestinian areas of the city. This in the Palestinian area of the city has water jugs up on top of the roofs. The reason why is because they do not always get water access. Is the Israeli government, municipality shuts off water access for the Palestinian neighborhoods. You will not see those water jugs on the roofs of Israeli settlements because they always have water access. Electricity gets turned off in the Palestinian quarters. It does not get cut off in the Israeli settlements. We drove through and looked at schools. We've got Palestinian schools, run down, dilapidated, overflowing with students. Drove by Israeli schools, pristine, perfect, beautiful playgrounds, access to incredible curriculum. The curriculum is all from the Israeli perspective. Palestinians who have to go there because the quality of the Palestinian schools is so terrible end up getting fed a particular perspective that is not their own. So they get a very different education in that context. Driving around the settlements, you see beautiful infrastructure, you see sidewalks, you see it's clean. You drive right around the corner and you see, in the Palestinian segment, no sidewalks, no parking. Cars are everywhere trying to get crammed into the whatever space they have. And the guy that was driving me around in East Jerusalem, I met with a whole bunch of people. I talked to people, cab drivers, shop owners, history PhDs, human rights defenders, Israelis, Palestinians. And the guy that was driving me around said, you know, we're not criminals. We want to abide by the law, but there's nowhere to park. And we all pay taxes. None of the money that we pay in taxes comes back to us in the form of infrastructure, education, electricity, water, etc. Here's a view from the Mount of Olives of the Old City. You see there Al-Aqsa Mosque, Dome of the Rock. Another view. Another view from within the Old City itself. One of the things that the guy that was with me said, you'll notice we've got a mosque and a church, and a mosque and a church, and a synagogue and a mosque and a church, and they're all hundreds of years old because We've all lived together for centuries and centuries and millennia, and we had a coexistence. There was multiplicity here. This is not a religious war. Damascus Gate. As we were entering into the old city, we saw Palestinians being detained here by soldiers. The number of Israeli soldiers that were guarding and walking around the old city was exponentially higher since October 7th. Everybody's getting frisked. We weren't able to go into the Dome of the Rock or into Al-Aqsa Mosque because they were not letting Palestinians in. They are still not letting Palestinians in. We're currently, this is Ramadan. This is the holiest time of the year for those that are of the Muslim faith, and Palestinian Muslims are not able to go and worship. There are people that live 5, 10, 20 minutes away from one of the second most holy place in their religion. They've never been able to go and visit. Silwan, let's talk about Silwan. So in East Jerusalem, one of the areas of the Palestinian, neighborhoods is called Silwan. Silwan has been under threat. Basically, I think it's like 70 or 80% of the homes in Silwan are under demolition order. Basically, for any reason whatsoever, in order to try and push Palestinians out of their homes and villages, Israel will place a demolition order on a Palestinian home. Basically say, we can at any point in time tear down your home. And this can be because of a traffic violation. It can be because you talked back to a soldier. It can be because you had to do some upkeep on your kitchen, right? In order to update your kitchen, some of these homes are hundreds of years old and you need to have a new faucet put in, you need to go and get a permit. Now, permit, you have to apply first for the permit and you have to pay an exorbitant amount of money for that first stage of the application. And then you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait. And eventually you might get to another stage of the application if you ever hear back. And then you got to pay another exorbitant amount of money. And then you wait and you wait and you wait. And they wait you out. You'll be waiting for your permit to update your faucet for years. And you've paid thousands of shekels at this point. So what do? You need a new faucet. So you do it, right? Now you've made an update in your kitchen without a permit. Now you've got a demolition order if the Israeli municipality finds out. They can come and tear down your home at any given point in time. Also, notice these settlements, this is not a settlement. This is a neighborhood, Palestinian neighborhood. It gets surrounded by Israeli settlements. They intentionally try and separate Palestinian neighborhoods from each other by building settlements in between, right? So they surround you, right? And then they squeeze you. So there's no way for a Palestinian neighborhood to go outward. You got to go up. Palestinians have children. There needs to be new rooms, new space in their homes. And so they need to build up, right? They build another floor. Again, same thing. They need a new space. They need new room in their house, right? Because they've got a new baby. They've got their family situation has evolved. They can't wait years and years and years to never eventually get denied for this permit. Well, they built. They have to risk the possibility, the likelihood that they'll get a demolition order, and they just do it anyway, right? Now, odds are they'll get the demolition order. It's, like I said, 70, 80%. I forget the numbers, and my notes won't print. But it's an exorbitant amount of homes in these Palestinian neighborhoods in East Jerusalem that are under this situation. So what happens one day, some bulldozers will roll up and say, it's time, we're taking you down. And the thing is, nobody in the neighborhood, you'll see the tanks come in and the bulldozers come in, you don't know, and the soldiers all armed, you don't know whose house in the neighborhood is next, right? Is it gonna be mine? And so kids come home from school one day, their house is knocked down. Now, on top of this, if the Israeli bulldozers are the ones to tear down your home, you've got to pay tens of thousands of dollars in fines to pay them for the privilege of knocking down your home. Yes. So most of the time, they will come to you and say, either you knock down your house or we will. And so people have to make the painful decision to with their own two hands, brick by brick, tear down their own home. Think about it. Go home tonight and imagine having to destroy your house. All of the things in your home that you love, all of your memories in that house that you have built. You have to go home tonight and tear down your own house. And if you don't, then somebody else is going to do it for you tomorrow morning, and you're going to get charged tens of thousands of dollars for the privilege of having them do it. This is the situation for most of the homes in Silwan. They are under demolition order right now. They don't know when they're going to be next. Part of one of the excuses that is being given is that the Israelis, they want to build, there's so many tourists. We need some more infrastructure to support our booming tourist industry. And we have over here this beautiful old city, and we have up there the beautiful Mount of Olives. And so we don't want our tourists to have to go through the Palestinian area. That would mean they would meet Palestinians and maybe ask some questions. We actually would prefer them to maybe, fly over Silwan. And so what they're doing right now is they are in the process of building a cable car system to transport tourists from the area of the old city up to the Mount of Olives and create a beautiful garden, tourist area. It'll be lovely. In order to do that, they need to demolish a whole bunch of homes in Silwan. And one of the things they're doing is they're saying, you know what, we're so nice, we're so wonderful. We will let you choose whose house has to be demolished. So, I don't know, think about the possibilities and potential for division in a small town. Just ponder what divisiveness in a small town could look like and what could possibly happen if an outside source said, you and your neighbor need to have come to a decision whose house is going to get torn down. This is one of the tools of divide and conquer, produce division amongst the community. One of the things to note about this neighborhood in Silwan is there's been for years now this art installation called Eyewitness Silwan. If you look closely, you'll see eyes painted across all of these different buildings. Eyes looking out over the neighborhood of Silwan. This is one of the forms of resistance, art as a form of resistance that is very prevalent in Palestine. And they have painted a whole host of different eyes, and some of them are supposed to belong to particularly famous people. There is George Floyd eyes up in Silwan. There's Rachel Corrie eyes up in Silwan, if anybody's familiar with Rachel Corrie. She was an American student from Washington State, I believe, who went out to Gaza to be in solidarity with the Palestinian people. She engaged in a peaceful, nonviolent act of civil disobedience, standing in front of a bulldozer that was coming to tear down a Palestinian home and land. And that bulldozer was, they decided to run her over twice. And she is known today amongst the Palestinian people as a great hero, a martyr for the cause of liberation, someone who saw the violence that was taking place. This was 20 years ago, right? This is not something recent that just happened a couple weeks ago in Gaza. This is part of the ongoing, slow-moving genocide that's been taking place for decades. And so Rachel Corrie's eyes are there as well in Silwan as part of this act of resistance and resilience. This is the home of a man who just had to watch bulldozers on February 14th tear down his home. He now owes $34,000 to pay for the act of them tearing down his home. He invited us, he welcomed us into the remains of his home. We sat underneath a tarp to hear from him about his experience. His crime, he's a community leader. He's someone who was hosting people to come and tour Silwan to get to know the community there. And because of his act of resistance, by being someone who was a leader in his community, someone who was advocating, by the way, he advocates against forced displacement. He advocates against home demolitions. Because of that, his home was targeted and they tore it down. There he is. Fakhri Abu Dias is right here. This is his home. He welcomed us there. And this is a co-worker, a co-laborer in the work with him, Angela Godfrey Goldstein, and they work together as part. She's an Israeli through marriage, and she is part of the Israeli Committee Against Home Demolitions. And she also shared about her work to resist this home demolition practice. Now, you'll remember that I said earlier, he's a permanent resident. He's not a citizen of Israel. He's a permanent resident because he was born and raised in East Jerusalem, just like the cab driver that picked me up from the airport. He said, I don't have a citizenship anywhere, right? I was born in East Jerusalem. I am not a citizen of anywhere. I have a permanent residency. In order to maintain that permanent residency, you need to consistently prove to the state of Israel that the center of your life is in East Jerusalem. If, for whatever reason, Israel thinks the center of your life is no longer in East Jerusalem, they revoke your permanent residency card, and now you are no one. You have no papers anywhere. You immediately become a refugee. What reasons might there be for no longer having the center of your life be in East Jerusalem? Being homeless? Going to school in the West Bank? Maybe if you wanted to go to a university in Ramallah, right? Getting your medicine at a pharmacy in the West Bank. Medication somewhere else. The most minute, okay, here's one. I don't know if you've seen pictures of the wall. I don't think I included it in this area, this section of the slides. The apartheid wall that separates East Jerusalem and Israel from the West Bank. That wall, when it was built, went directly through one Palestinian man's home. His backyard is in the West Bank. His front yard is in East Jerusalem. If he goes out his back door and waters some flowers, the center of his life is no longer in East Jerusalem. He gets his permanent residency revoked. There are soldiers stationed outside his house to make sure he stays on the right side of his house. We met with UNRWA. This is Adam Belukos, who is the head of UNRWA in the West Bank. Gave a lot of incredible information, and I had a lot of wonderful notes that I would have shared with you. I will say, I mean, this is a man who cares deeply about the Palestinian people. This is a man who, takes his job seriously and cares deeply for the staff members that he is responsible for. He shared that earlier that day, some Israeli settlers shot at some of his staff. I don't know if you've seen the news recently, but there are reports that have been substantiated that UNRWA staff members that have been arrested have been tortured and had confessions forced out of them. So UNRWA is a UN refugee works agency. It is the UN agency that was established in 1948. After that, those 750,000 refugees were kicked out of their homes. The UN established this agency with terms of 3 years, basically saying for the next 3 years, you are going to care for and provide support, direct support for these refugees. And so that looks like schools, that looks like medical clinics, vaccination clinics, that looks like sanitation work, trash pickup, right? The vast majority of UNRWA workers are Palestinians, so that provides jobs for them. And it also provides just direct support of a whole wide variety of things. Now, every 3 years, basically they look and say, is our mandate complete? Meaning, do the refugees no longer need us because there's a viable, long-term, sustainable solution? No, we gotta re-up. Right? So every 3 years, they have to re-up the establishment of this program so that Palestinian refugees can continue to have the direct support that is not available through any other agency worldwide. They have such a specific mandate that other agencies cannot come in and just replace what they do. We drove by UNRWA schools. The UNRWA building was the most, pristine building that we were in. It is a cultural center and a hub for communities in which they exist. I'm just skipping to the end here, and of course I'm so over time, and I apologize for that. What I was planning on transitioning to discussion here, we haven't even gotten to the West Bank. One of the key asks that we brought back to our elected officials was restore UNRWA funding now. We need UNRWA funding to be restored today, immediately. At the current rate, without the funding that is provided from nations like the United States and various European countries, they've got weeks left of being able to function, and then they're gonna have to decide medical clinic, education, where do we put these kids, trash pickup, what gets cut? So restoration of UNRWA funding and protection, guaranteed protection of aid workers who are targeted consistently. I met with a man in DC who, American man who used to go to Gaza often to work with relief organizations, and he shared of a time and he was in Gaza, standing in between two Palestinian aid workers, and he saw a Israeli sniper light on the forehead of the person next to him. He was shot, gunned down, dead right next to him. Palestinian man right on the other side of him, shot down, survived. The second man did survive. He said, Israeli military snipers will consistently target aid workers because they want the American aid workers to be scared and pull out. They want them out of here. Sam Bahor, highly recommend. I've got a plug for a documentary that I'm really hoping that we show in the coming weeks. And he is featured, and I just highly, highly commend to you this documentary where he tells of his story, and it was an incredible time. I want to keep going because there's some other things that I want to get to. Also, Sahar Francis, who is with Adamir Prisoner Support. So Sahar, she works at a nonprofit. She's a lawyer, and she provides support for Palestinians who are taken into administrative detention. So we're in the West Bank now, by the way. We're now in Ramallah. And so here we are in the West Bank. We are right here. One thing to know about the West Bank is that it's divided into three areas A, B, and C. Area A is supposedly under the Palestinian Authority. I say supposedly because the Israeli military can still, at any point in time, any given time, come in, do night raids, take people out of their homes and throw them in jail. Then there's Area B, which is supposedly a mix between Israel and Palestine in terms of governance. Again, the Israeli military can do whatever it wants. And then there's Area C, which is entirely under Israeli military occupation. So so the West Bank is completely under military occupation from the Israeli military. They can, at any given point in time, come into your home, take anybody they want without reason. They do not have to give you a reason, and throw that person in jail. Any age, any time. Usually this happens at night. One of the big things that we've heard from Sam Bahor, from Sahar Francis, and from the next group that we met with here, Salwa Duabis, and Gerard Horton of the Military Court Watch. All of these folks have said that the night raids and the arrests have skyrocketed since October 7th. It was happening all the time. It is happening constantly now. So if you remember back in November, I'm going to wrap up quickly, even though I just scratched the surface. Remember back in November, there was a very temporary ceasefire. And during that ceasefire, there was an exchange of hostages, right? So some of the hostages that Hamas took were sent back to Israel, and Israel released some prisoners. They released women and children. These are Palestinian hostages. They have been taken from their homes in the middle of the night for no reason under the guise of administrative detention, and they are not given really any sort of support. There's all kinds of details that I could give if I had my notes in front of me. Military Court Watch specifically deals with children that are in military administrative detention. Again, these folks are highlighted in the documentary that I'm hoping to watch, so you'll get more details hopefully soon. Ramallah also has Nelson Mandela Square. Here is a statue of Nelson Mandela. You'll note here, he says, "We know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of Palestinians." It is a consistent element of South African solidarity with the Palestinians. Nelson Mandela recognized the apartheid state that Israel is. Desmond Tutu recognized the apartheid state that Israel is. You see this ongoing solidarity between South Africa and Palestine because they know what they see when they see it, because they've experienced it. Much more to say about this, and perhaps some folks will in the room might speak to the Palestinian Museum of Natural History, and I think particularly folks at First Parish and in Lincoln would be interested in that. Don't have time. This is the head of the Palestinian Natural History Museum, Mazen Kumseya. Perhaps some of his friends in the room might say some more about him in a bit. They have this beautiful, area dedicated to biodiversity, understanding the natural world as it exists in Palestine, and supporting the just thriving of humans and nature and connectivity between the two. So I think it'd be of particular interest to you all. I'll take time another time to talk about it, and maybe we'll meet him someday. He comes in the area sometimes. We're learning about the natural world here in Palestine. Here we are in the Al Rawad Cultural Arts Center at the Aida refugee camp. If you'll recall, we talked about the refugees from the Nakba that were displaced and sent to all different places in the West Bank. There's hundreds of thousands of refugees, and they are in refugee camps. And here we are at the refugee camp in Bethlehem, Aida refugee camp. And this is Abed. He is the head of this cultural arts center, and it's just an incredible man. We've got a library, we've got music classes, we've got dance classes, we've got all sorts of vocational training, we've got just a community center to support children and women, to allow them to find what he calls ways of beautiful resistance, nonviolent ways to thrive and live, and support one another as they await their right of return. There we are outside of the Cultural Center. They did 3 dances for us, and then there was a musical, some singing and some instruments component as well. A beautiful testimony to resistance and resilience, and to that beautiful resistance, right? We walked around the refugee camp. We had all sorts of kids and teenagers running up to us, wanting to talk to us and ask us, where are you from? Where are you from, right? Some signs that were up and around in the cultural center. We don't have the luxury of despair, but a steadfast hope that we can do better and leave a brighter future for our children and the generations to come. A board talking about where is home for children that have been separated from their home. This was a women's unit hall, and I love this. The right to return home is inalienable. These girls were so, they just thought my hair was the coolest thing, and they ran over, we want a selfie, we want to take a selfie. So they took a picture with their phone and then with mine, so yeah. The dance of the landowners. Picture of, or a carving of Palestinian dance and indigenous American dance, naming the connection to the land that they have been removed from. We will not leave. We will return. A listing of all of the towns, the villages, the cities in 48 that they were cleansed from, that they were removed from, that their parents, their grandparents, and some of them still alive today, removed from. We will return. This is, as you enter the refugee camp, there's a sign that says, welcome to the most tear gas place on earth. I picked up a tear gas canister. It said, made in America. Canisters, the bombs, the bullets that are being used to commit ethnic cleansing and genocide are being paid by us in this room. We're funding it. This is the entrance of the camp. Over the street is this key symbol of their right to return. I bought this little store just around the corner from the entrance called the Key of Return. It's owned by this refugee family who makes handmade objects. I bought these earrings made of olive wood. I bought that. It's an image of Palestine, historic Palestine, covered by an old thobe. A thobe is a Palestinian dress. That thobe is 80 years old. It's older than the state of Israel. A woman who was forcibly removed from her home, would have had that with her as she was kicked out, and they used it to make this art. They also used tear gas canisters to create jewelry, necklaces, and I bought this necklace made of a tear gas canister that was paid for with my tax dollars, that they turned into a key that I now am wearing around my neck. We met with pastors. That's Munter Isaac. If you saw the viral video that went around over Christmas time of Christ under the rubble, we stayed at the guest house at his church. We went to his church on Sunday. Incredible man. Sami Awad, the head of the Holy Land Trust, another nonviolent peace activist. Learned a lot. Can't talk about it. I've got a whole bunch of pictures of the wall in Bethlehem. We walked the wall. I think that was one of the most formative moments for me. Some images of the wall. Make hummus, not walls. Here's George Floyd. The Banksy image, 2 angels prying apart the wall. Just remove it, and it's a Nike symbol. This is a mural of Jerusalem that is on the other side of the city. They can't see it, they can't go. So a painting of the wall broken open as if they could see it. The rockets may be above us. They have forgotten that Allah is above them. Here's an image of a home demolition in progress. Here's an image of a child shooting flowers. Another larger image of the wall that's in Bethlehem. This is part of the wall that's in Ramallah. You can see someone with a slingshot, with a heart in the slingshot. It says over here, you can't really see it, but it says from Palestine with love. Here's a Banksy image. I don't know if you were aware, but Banksy is very deeply committed to Palestinian liberation. He is in Palestine a lot. He opened up a hotel in Bethlehem called the Waldorf Hotel. and it boasts the worst view in the world. It's right next to the wall. And so he does a lot of murals in Palestine as cultural acts of resistance. This is one of them, the dove in the bulletproof vest. Until you are free, neither am I. Went to Tent of Nations. So much to say here, can't. Basically, this is the Nasser family. We met with Daoud Nasser. This is in Area C, just outside of Bethlehem, so it's completely under military occupation. I mean, the whole thing is, but at least they say it. It's completely under military occupation. And that's where most of the settlements, Israeli settlements are. So his home is on top of a hill in a small Palestinian village just below them. And then on all the hills around them, Israeli settlements have been built all around them. And the Israeli government has been trying to take over his land for 34 years. He has the deed from when his grandfather owned the land under the Ottoman Empire. He has the paperwork, yet and still they have been taking him to court for 30 years to try and take the land from him. This is a farm that he has, olive trees, almond trees, etc. He hosts international visitors, volunteers to come and farm with him and learn about Palestinian land and culture and farming. I think it'd be a great opportunity to build some connections there in Palestine for us. Farming community, more farming communities to talk about in a moment. Here's Daoud, an incredible man. We will not be enemies. We refuse to be enemies, he says. He's a nonviolent, peaceful resistor. They can't build anything because they're under demolition order, right? So they can't build anything, so instead they go underground. They are in caves. So we met in a cave, and in all different languages on the walls around us, peace, justice, and conservation of creation. That's their theme, their motto. It's his brother. We're talking to him, meeting in the cave, the whole group, meeting just outside the cave. Lyrics of, we are one. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreams. We are the breath of the ancestors. We are the spirit of God. We are mothers of courage, fathers of time, daughters of dusk, and sons of great visions. One of the settlements surrounding him. And they're all around him. I think there's like 5 or 6 now. Anywhere from a few hundred and like an outpost to tens of thousands. Some of his trees, he's had settlers come onto his land, devastate his trees, even though like this is his land, they'll say this is not your land, we're taking it, and they'll tear down his trees. We're moving on to the South Hebron Hills, another farming community. We're in Atawani. This is a small village, shepherding community just outside of Hebron. This is the Harani family. One of the most amazing families, groups of people I've ever met in my life, community leaders, nonviolent resistors. The children have kind of inherited their father's nonviolent resistance mentality and established this group called the Youth of Samud, which means Youth of Steadfastness. They accompany children from the local villages to school in the mornings because the children have been getting attacked by settlers. They go and renovate caves. It's one of the caves that they renovated because local villagers are getting their homes demolished. They have nowhere to go. They go and they live in the caves, right? And one of the local Bedouin boys who was welcoming us to his cave. They go and visit isolated villagers that have no food. They provide food. They do a whole host of things. This is a tent in a Bedouin village called El-Khair. And so the Bedouin community is right here. That's the tent where we met. There's a fence and there's a settlement right next to it. That house is the settlement. So here's this Bedouin village that has been there for decades upon decades. Settlers came in, built a settlement right next to them, just next to them, right? We exited the tent after meeting with some of the community leaders. There's a settler walking up and down the fence looking at us. He was in a military uniform. He's not in the military. This is a thing that's happening now, is that settlers are putting on military uniforms, walking around with guns given to them by the Israeli government, paid for by our tax dollars, and they use those guns to just shoot down random Palestinians. The Harani family, their cousin was shot point blank in the stomach by a settler. A group of settlers came into their village, attacked them, shot their cousin in the stomach. He survived miraculously, but he is permanently altered. No consequences for the settler that did this. Here we are in the tent, playing with some Bedouin kids. They were so excited to see people. Nobody's coming to visit. That's one of the things we heard constantly is, thank you so much for coming. More people need to come. Nobody's been coming since October 7th. There's, once again, the Harani family. This is Hafez Harani and his kids, Samiha and Hamoudi, the youth of Samud, and then there's Sammy, who we did not meet, who is traveling. Is another member of this incredible family. And there's 8 kids, all activists, children and grandchildren of incredible activists. Okay, Issa Amro, human rights defender living in Hebron. He was arrested on October 7th. He was one of the first people arrested. He's not in Hamas. He's a peaceful, nonviolent resistor. He is known by Israel. That they know who he is and what his political affiliations are. They know he's a nonviolent, peaceful activist, human rights defender. They arrested him. They tortured him. They sexually abused him. He still does not have feeling in his hands because of the assault that he had endured. He brought us around Hebron to see. Showed us some of the stores that were boarded up after the invasion in 1967. Community peacemakers. CPT, the community peacemaker team. They accompany children in Hebron to school in the morning because, again, school and on the way to school are one of the key places that Israeli military will pick up children to detain them and arrest them, and they'll never be seen or heard from again. And so they accompany them so that they can call human rights organizations if the child is detained, so somebody knows where they are. This is a shopping center, completely shut down, has been shut down since October 7th. Nobody can get in and out. There are 6 entrances and exits to Hebron. Only 1 is open, the rest have been shut down. Traffic is horrendous. It's because one of the key things that elements of control is control of movement in the West Bank. They want to force everybody to go through a single point, and you wait at checkpoints for hours and hours and hours. You're trying to get to work. You don't know if you're ever going to be able to get back in. I was talking to someone, a shop owner. I said, well, so you got to leave like really early in order to get home because you don't know if you're going to be able to make it by curfew. And he said, I don't know when I leave my door in the morning if I'm coming home alive. Checkpoint in Hebron into like the H1 and H2. There's netting. We're on the street around Palestinian shops. There's netting above because Israeli settlers have moved into the 2nd floor. They throw trash. They throw out acid water. They throw out feces down into the Palestinian area. So as we were walking around with Issa, we noticed Israeli snipers, military snipers on all of the roofs. They had their guns pointed at us as we were walking around, taking the tour. Then as we were completing the tour, there was a group of Israeli settlers that live in Hebron that were going on a field trip to go see the Palestinian side of the city, completely surrounded by Israeli military. And so we were cordoned off as these these soldiers pushed us around to allow basically what the settlers do is they like to go on these field trips to say, look at all the Jewish parts of the city, right? And in order to protect them, they are surrounded by soldiers the whole time, protect them from this child on the bike. Here they are, protecting the settlers, looking at us. Again, child, this is his daily life under occupation. We went to church. The Christ under the rubble is still there. Now it's Lent, so Jesus isn't there, but I wanted to take a picture with that. Beautiful dome. This is in Bethlehem, Christmas Lutheran Church. There's Munter Isaac preaching. And then we went to DC. And here is a picture after one of our advocacy meetings. Here's a picture of me at the public civil disobedience and interfaith program. Muslims, Christians, Jews, as well as Hindus and Buddhists all came together for a public vigil, as well as protest. We engaged in nonviolent civil disobedience. We tied the banner to the fence, risking arrest to try and get some attention on this, to call for a ceasefire and our other demands. They didn't arrest us, so we took the banner down. We went and blocked the entrance to the White House. They didn't arrest us, so we took the banner over to the intersection, blocked the intersection. They didn't arrest us. So we figured they didn't want the optics of arresting a bunch of clergy the day before the State of the Union. But we were there trying to be a public witness. One other thing I want to say is that on my way out of Tel Aviv, I did get detained. So as I wrap up, and we have a grand total, we'll do like 20 minutes of conversation, and I apologize for the small amount of conversation that we'll have, but again, I'm hopeful that this is just the beginning. I got through security. I got to my gate 2 hours ahead of time, just under. All of a sudden over the intercom, Sarah Klockowski, please report to the information center. So I reported to the information center where I was detained and interrogated and subjected to extra screening for an hour and a half. They asked me a whole host of questions. Basically, they had gone into my checked luggage and found some things they did not like, which are over here on the table, which you can go take a look at after and see, what do you think made them say, this girl is a risk? So they asked me a whole bunch of questions. I can talk about more. They let me go with 10 minutes to run back to the other side of the airport. I just got my flight just as they were closing up I just caught my flight. They wanted to intimidate me. They didn't like that I'd gone to the West Bank. They didn't like that I'd met with Palestinians. There has been an ongoing effort to keep the West in the dark about this. This has been something that's been happening for decades, and there's a concerted effort to hide this. And so that was just another one of the symbols. They wanted to intimidate. They wanted me to be worried about not getting my flight, and they don't want me to go back. I'm going to go back. So that's that. Thank you for your attention. My talking for a very, very, very long time, and I probably should have done this in a different way. But again, I appreciate your attention. Questions, comments, yeah buts, what ifs, etc.
Were you ever scared?
I was scared in Hebron. Basically that day, we called it the day with all the guns, right? We were at Tent of Nations first, and one of the things I forgot to mention is while we were at Tent of Nations, a couple of Israeli settlers dressed up in military uniforms holding guns that my taxes paid for came on and trespassed onto the Nasser farm, and they started like circling us, right? So settlers, there's extremely increased in settler violence right now. So I knew that that's been the case, so seeing them was concerning. I wasn't really scared at that time because there's a whole group of us, and Tent of Nations is known for having a lot of international visitors. And what Daoud said was that the international visitors are our guardian angels. They're the reason why we're still alive. They're the reason why we're still here, because we are one of the only groups, our homes, situations where we're known globally, right? People go there and visit and talk to there was a delegation from, Holland there that day to visit and see the situation. So, that was one thing. Also, when we were going through the checkpoint that day, there were Israeli snipers that had their guns trained on us. But it was in Hebron, when we got to Hebron, with the snipers on the roof. And I knew about that history of those snipers that target Palestinians while they're around Americans, right? So I was mostly concerned about the Palestinians that were with us, right? But also stray bullet, who knows, right? So that was concerning. Also, I was concerned when I got on the Boeing airplane. Those are the two times that I was scared. Other questions? Pass the mic, thank you.
In the spirit of the Lenten book,
Yes.
Hope.
Yes.
How do you come out on all this? Is there hope or despair?
I mean, I will say that from the perspective of the folks that we heard from, there was a tremendous amount of despair, a tremendous amount of feeling of abandonment. Where is the international community on this? What is you've been talking about international law for decades, since the formation of this whole system that's supposed to protect people like us from situations like this, where's the international community, especially where's the church, right? And so there's a feeling that I heard from folks of despair, betrayal. I also heard hope. And I think for me, the hope is in all of the resilience that I saw in that refugee camp of those kids dancing and singing and holding on to their culture and resisting through art, resisting those murals. I mean, the wall is devastating to look at. It is a scar. It's a blight on the planet. It is a physical manifestation of apartheid. And to see the expressions of solidarity from people there, people that visit all around the world, it has been turned into this statement of, we are with you, you're not alone. And I guess my hope is in the fact that more and more people are becoming aware of what's actually happening and been happening. And the spirit of resilience and steadfastness, the youth of Samud, were a huge impact on me, and seeing their commitment to their community and supporting one another. I deeply believe that my liberation is bound up in Palestinian liberation. And so my hope is in the belief that we all want to get free, and we can get free if we come together and be in solidarity. Right. Thank you. Other questions?
This is less a question, but I hope you don't mind a little announcement.
Please.
That the Youth Programs Committee at First Parish is hosting a candlelight vigil next Wednesday on the 20th, right out here on the lawn at 6 p.m. And we're inviting everyone in the Lincoln community and beyond. It's really geared towards children, but it's always lovely for children to see the adults in the community supporting them on this journey to learn about what is happening and supporting children on both sides of this. So if you are free and able to join, we'd love that.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that.
Sarah, what was the reaction in Washington? Was it perfunctory? Did it give you any reason for hope?
I will say that the staffers that we met with gave me reason for hope. It was very clear that they were like, I mean, to me, my impression was the staffers got it. They understood. They were listening. They're young. You know, there's a generational thing happening here. I don't have a lot of hope in the politicians, to be honest. And that is a whole conversation for another time. But I will say that it was more of a way to answer the call to speak the truth, speak truth to power, and just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. I don't have a lot of hope in the immediate term, but I'm going to keep doing it because I think that there are growing numbers of people that are listening. And I think a handful of people that are walking those halls are listening. Not enough, but I think I saw Joan's hand, or no.
Two things, Sarah. Do you know if there's anything underway, anybody trying to do anything in the International Court of Justice? And secondly, you probably weren't with any of these people, but is there any sense that there is any group of Israelis that is objecting and wants to do something?
So we met with a couple Israelis that do object. There are Israelis on that Israeli committee against housing demolition. So there are resistors. There are always resistors, right? There are not enough. And unfortunately, the vast majority have been, like perhaps some of us might be familiar with, fed a narrative of a particular national exceptionalism and the inherent goodness of our country, right? And a particular narrative about our national history that makes it very difficult to really meet people on this, you know, in a way that will move the conversation forward. I think that the hope in transformation, I think that there will be transformation. I do think there are resistors. I think the hope will be external pressure that forces a reckoning internally of who are we really. And that external pressure I think there's a whole host of nonviolent ways of resistance that we can engage in externally. I'm thinking particularly about BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction. And so thinking about ways that we can put pressure internally that will hopefully force a internal evaluation of who we are. And I don't know the answer to the question about what's going on at the International Court of Justice. I know that we had just that resolution that this is a plausible genocide, and so we have this temporary order that they're supposed to be trying to mitigate civilian harm. They're supposed to be allowing aid in. They are not doing those things really in any substantial way. And so I know that there's a current push to try and call them to abide by that resolution that was passed a couple months ago, but it has not been happening just yet. And so that's part of what, I heard again and again, what's the use of international law then, right, is what I heard from people across the spectrum of experiences there. Barbara?
Just in answer to your question, there was a recent survey done in Israel, and 68% of the people surveyed said that no aid should be sent to Gaza. No aid.
Yeah. There are currently Israeli protesters standing outside the gates of Gaza to block aid from getting in. That's the culture that has been fomented. So I think that's part of what we need to recognize, there are certain politicians that we can think of in our own country that foment division. They are symptoms of the problem, right? But that problem goes back generations that produced leaders like that then stir up ideology amongst us, right? It's the same sort of thing happening, right? We've got an extreme right-wing government in Israel that is a symptom of this ongoing problem that is continuing to foment this ideology. Joan.
Could you say a word or two about boycott, divest, and another word I don't know?
Sanction. Yes. So boycott, divestment, and sanction. This is part of the nonviolent resistance movement that was established in response to South African apartheid in order to put pressure on the South African government to end the apartheid state and to become an actual democracy, right? And with civil rights for all. Outside nations, and first of all, consumers, there's the consumer level of all this where we can boycott Israeli products. Look at the hummus that you're buying. Is it made in Israel? Look at different products that are being Israeli dates, etc. And don't buy Israeli products. There are other elements of the boycott, like there's the academic boycott where scholars are invited to say, I'm not going to attend a scholarly function in Israel. When I was there, I didn't buy anything in Israel. I was very hungry in that airport. I did not buy anything in that airport. Also, I ended up getting detained, so I didn't have time. But I didn't have an Israeli cab driver, I had a Palestinian cab driver. So the boycott element. Divestment, looking at where our money is tied up, and saying, please take my money out of companies that are funding the military effort and funding the occupation. So individuals can take money out of those institutions in your retirement, etc. Institutions can divest. So Harvard, for example, could divest from the weapons company that is making the weapons that are being sent to go bomb civilians over in Gaza, and the bullets that are being used to shoot Palestinians in the West Bank. And then sanctions. So this is at the governmental level, where the government says, we are sanctioning Israel, we are not doing this trade agreement with them, etc. This is a nonviolent way to put pressure on the state of Israel to end the apartheid, to end the occupation. FYI, I think it's 37 states now have laws on the books in the United States against BDS. It's illegal in the United States to say you are engaging in boycott, divestment, and sanctions. If you are a government employee, you have to sign a thing that says, I will not engage in BDS. This is because of a couple particular lobbies that have been working on our government to create these, that pay our politicians, that pay them to establish Israel-friendly legislation like anti-BDS laws.
Oh.
Yes. BDS.net, yeah. BDSmovement.net, yeah. Highly recommend going and looking into that online.
It lists all of the companies that are invested and recommended to boycott.
Yes, so the website, the BDS website, gives you the list of the companies, and you can learn more there. Any other questions? It's 8:30.
I had one. Is the two-state solution ever talked about there?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we heard about, I think there's like 37 solutions. Here's the thing. One of the things they said is, like, don't focus on the one state, two state when you go back, because number one, we need ceasefire now. We need a restoration of UNRWA. We need protection of aid workers. We need the ending of the military occupation. In order for there to be a meaningful solution, whether one state or two state, there has to be conversation amongst equals, and there can't be a conversation amongst equals when there's a military occupation going on. And so there's got to be a withdrawal of the military from the West Bank, from Gaza. There needs to be self-determination for the Palestinian people. There's not really effective, this is another one of the things we heard a lot, was we don't really have effective and reliable leadership, political leadership amongst ourselves that we trust. And so there needs to be some self-determination amongst the Palestinians, election of reliable leaders, so that there can then be helpful conversation and dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians. I heard about a one-state solution, which I didn't get to talk about, Jeff Halper and his one democratic state solution, where it basically talks about one state between the river and the sea, equal rights for every single person. One person, one vote, etc. Right? Nobody's got to leave. Everybody can stay where they are. Refugees have the right to return to the cities and towns that they were expelled from, and we're all part of one state. I also heard a very, interesting suggestion of a possible two-state solution in the meantime. They want a state. They want Palestinian sovereignty. There's differences of opinion about one or two or some version of a hybrid. But number one, ceasefire now, restore aid, end the occupation. I recommend maybe calling your representatives, saying, I went to a talk by my minister who went on a solidarity delegation. I'm horrified by the things that I heard. We want ceasefire now. We want restoration of aid. We want an end to occupation and the military funding of this occupation now. So some things that you can think about doing. And also, stay tuned for documentary screenings and more conversations. Like I said, there's so much that I didn't cover. And also, there's a lot of incredible organizations doing community building, peaceful resistance work that I'd love to introduce First Parish in our communities too. And so think about what would it look like for First Parish then, having then done some of this learning, to then say, let's try and build some relationships with folks there on the ground. What do you want to see happen, and how can First Parish make some connections and contribute to the good, right, and to the healing of all. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your patience. More to come.